What's up, guys? Nick Whalen, Alex Barutha here from RotoWire, talking some fantasy basketball. We have our full player projections, all of our rankings up at rotowire.com. You can go check those out whenever you want, rotowire.com/basketball. We just published an updated top 150 with all of our analysis on those top 150 guys as well. And with that in mind, Alex, I want to talk about some of the players who we found really difficult for us to rank this season. So we'll go back and forth. We'll discuss a handful of names, but I want to give you a chance to talk about your process. I know you prepared a list of players here. How much did you value injuries? How much did you value, changes in situations, changes in teammates when you put together that list?
I wanted to mostly look at changes of scenery or just maybe guys who could maybe take a leap in development, but it's unclear. Just because I think, of course, the injury-prone guys are on the top of everyone's mind when they're drafting, but I think there are some other guys maybe farther down the list who also deserve to be mentioned as someone who could be a big swing piece in drafts.
I'll start us off here, and I'm going to go with a player where injuries are really the primary concern when it comes to fantasy, and that is Joel Embiid of the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, in terms of our default rankings on the site, he comes in a little bit higher. You and I decided to place him at 8th overall in our top 150, and I think on the surface that might seem a little low. Obviously, Joel Embiid was the number one player in per game value last season, but he was number 43 in total value when you factor in games played. And obviously that's been a concern for him throughout his career, dating all the way back to missing time to begin his career 10 years ago at this point. He was healthy enough the previous two seasons prior to this past season to still finish top 5 in total value, despite missing 16 and 14 games respectively in those 2 years. But the one thing that stuck out to me, Alex, is the rest of the league was missing more time in those 2 seasons, right? And we had a pretty healthy season overall. Obviously, there are a few outliers, but we started to see star players, creep closer to that 70, 72 game mark last season than we had the previous few years. So Embiid missing as much time as he did last season had more of an outsized effect in 23-24 than it did in the previous years. Nobody's debating that he's in that conversation for the number one overall player. I personally would not really consider him at number 1. I'm going Victor Wembanyama this year. Obviously, you have Nikola Jokic as a safe option, SGA, Luka Doncic. Again, you might see Joel Embiid at number 8 and say, man, that seems low. But I don't see this health trend necessarily reversing for Joel Embiid as he moves into his 30s.
No, you mentioned it. I mean, he's getting older. That doesn't help. And I think, with the 76ers, they added Paul George, and I think they probably believe now for them, playoffs are more important, and winning the NBA Finals and making sure Embiid is healthy for the NBA Finals potentially is more important than making sure he plays a bunch of regular season minutes, especially because the East is not particular. 76ers are not really at risk of falling out of the playoff picture in the East if Embiid misses some time. So I wouldn't be surprised if he sees more rest days. Maybe instead of 34 minutes a game, you start seeing 30, 31 minutes a game. But ultimately, I agree. I mean, it is difficult to rank him because his upside is as high as pretty much anybody in fantasy. But the downside is, of course, that he gets hurt.
All right, who's at the top of your list?
So I think it's someone who doesn't necessarily... He may not come to mind as someone that's tough to rank, but I have Paolo Banchero. He hasn't been as good in fantasy, I think, as he has been in real life. He's great points, rebounds, and assists. There's no question about that, but he's not really getting you any defensive stats. His free throw percentage is kind of weak. His 3-point shot, I think, is still a work in progress. I think you have the same worry. Am I going to draft him? Might I draft him too high? If I draft him at 35, is that crazy? Or is he actually on the cusp of becoming a star in the league? Or the reality is I don't think he'd be there for you at 80 because he's just got to get taken before that in a category league. I think trying to balance what is realistic for Banchero based on who he is just as a player versus what it feels like his upside could really be is going to be a challenge this year.
Yeah, I think he's somebody that will maybe be slightly overdrafted because there is name value here. He's certainly not going to be available to you in the 70s or the 80s. People are going to want Paolo Banchero on their roster. I mean, we're talking about a number 1 overall pick from a couple of years ago going into his 3rd season. This is typically, when you might see that big leap. And I think we did see some of the progress that we wanted to last season. I mean, he shot under 43% from the field as a rookie. He was up closer to 46% last season, took a step forward as a 3-point shooter as well. Would like to see a little bit more volume from 3. I mean, despite shooting 34%, which was a nice bump compared to the rookie season, still only hit 1.5 threes per game, which is fine, but in the modern NBA is still relatively low for a high usage star player. But you mentioned two things. I mean, the defensive stats, 1.5 combined steals and blocks last year. That's okay. I'd like to see at least, one steal a game. If he could get in the 1.1, 1.2 range, then we're talking that he's closer to a 2.0 stocks per game type of player. And, in category leagues, the free throw percentage is a killer. I mean, he actually regressed in that area last season, shot about 72% at the line. That's pretty tough for a guy who's getting there 7-8 times per game.
Yeah, and I mean, for a points league, definitely you draft him at 30, draft him at 25. I mean, he's going to be great there. And if you're in a head-to-head category, and you're like, let's say you're just punting, you're punting threes, you're punting field goal and free throw percentage, he's completely fine to draft there. But I just think trying to discern how big of a leap he might take is part of the difficulty.
Alex, I almost regret to bring up this player because I know he caused both of us immense pain in fantasy basketball last season. You know where I'm going here. Lauri Markkanen of the Utah Jazz. He's got the new contract. He's going to be in Utah this season. He cannot be traded per the NBA CBA. He comes in at 35 in our rankings, and I think that's appropriate given the risk reward profile here. He could certainly climb higher than that. I think if you told me that, Lauri Markkanen would play 70 plus games, I would be very comfortable taking him around ahead of that. But here we are yet again, where the Jazz remain in limbo. I think they're just good enough that they'll probably remain out of that basement, but if things do go awry for them and they're outskirts of the Cooper Flag sweepstakes, we could see them pull back yet again on their veterans as they've done the last 2 seasons. I really don't see myself drafting Lauri Markkanen because of that shutdown risk. But at the same time, I mean, he's far and away the best player on this team. Got off to a pretty nice start last season, had some ups and downs, but I think he's going to continue to grow. I like the player a ton. I can't get myself to trust the situation.
Situation is really difficult. You mentioned how poorly they project to be as a team and being in the Cooper Flag sweepstakes. I mean, they're maybe the third or fourth worst team in the NBA. I mean, I guess the potential here is that they're just going to be so bad they won't need to sit Markkanen, because if they're in the bottom 4, the lottery odds are flat. But everything you said is correct. I mean, he is a legitimate all-star player, one of the most efficient players in the NBA, period, let alone just efficient forwards in the NBA. But yeah, the situation, random back injury during your fantasy playoffs, that potential to me might even just knock him down like almost a full round of value.
Yeah, and I don't think you're going to get him too much later than where we have him slotted. Somebody's going to take Lauri Markkanen, someone's going to be willing to incur that risk. And after myself being that person who incurred said risk last season, I'm pretty comfortable passing that on to someone else in my league in 24-25. All right, back to you. Who's next on your list?
Next for me, Jonathan Kuminga of the Golden State Warriors. Yeah, I am worried about drafting him too low. And I've gotten him in a couple mock drafts now, very early mock drafts, obviously. I've drafted him around the 70s or the 80s. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a perfectly fine spot to draft him. So the balance here for me is the potential where it's like we have him right now projected for 18 points per game. But to me, all signs point to him as being the Warriors' second leading scorer behind Steph Curry. I mean, who else is even in the conversation besides, especially with Andrew Wiggins, playing like the past 2 seasons.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on with him. And it's not like Podziemski is going to be that guy. And Buddy Hield, I think Kuminga may have to score 22, 23 points a game for this Golden State Warriors team. And, does that kill his efficiency? Can he become a better 3-point shooter? The free throws haven't been amazing. There are a lot of questions about that. But I think that's what makes him tough to rank.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is room for growth here. I think we talk about the Klay Thompson departure like he was just some, carcass of his former self. I mean, Klay was still a really good player last year. He was not peak Klay Thompson. He was still a very, very valuable 3-point shooter, very valuable, real life player for the Warriors. And you're removing, 16 to 20 points on most nights from that rotation. Yeah, Buddy Hield makes up for some of that. Brandon Podziemski, probably takes on a bigger role this season. You hope that Andrew Wiggins can get back to the guy that he was a couple of seasons ago, specifically that finals run against the Celtics. But that feels like wish casting in a lot of ways. So I think you're right. I mean, you're not looking at Trace Jackson Davis or Draymond Green. Hey, go give us 20 a night, guys. That's not in the cards for either of those players. So there is upside there with Kuminga. And you brought up the shooting numbers. That's what we're worried about in category leagues. Ironically, he gained like 10 percentage points in free throw shooting last year, which is fantastic, but regressed as a 3-point shooter. Typically those things go hand in hand. He dropped about 5 percentage points from beyond the arc after shooting 37% from three 2 seasons ago. So if he can approach 20 points per game, if he can get that efficiency back to where it was specifically from 3 2 seasons ago, then yeah, I think you're looking at a reasonable value. And like Banchero, I mean, he's a player that you look at and say probably should be a little bit better in terms of the defensive numbers. Kuminga especially is just a crazy athlete. He's aggressive, and he only gave you 1.2 combined steals and blocks last year.
And I think he can improve on that. Also, if you're the Warriors, I mean, I think you want to try to feature him. I think now is like a make or break year for the Warriors in terms of like, we got to give Kuminga a shot, and just Kuminga in general, being like, I got to get my career up to the level that I think I could be when I was drafted 7th overall.
Next up on my list, Alex, I have the New York Knicks as an entire team. So we'll try to go through this relatively quickly, but I think all of Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, certainly Julius Randle, even Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart to some degree, Dante DiVincenzo, like all these guys are going to go through some degree of role change with this new look Knicks team. You bring in Bridges, you bring back Julius Randle to this team, you return OG Anunoby, and the Knicks that we think of over the second half of last season and into the playoffs, that's not what they're going to look like to begin this next season, right? I mean, Dante DiVincenzo is not going to be launching up 12 threes a game. And, I think I want to start with Julius Randle because he's the skeleton key for me for the Knicks this season. I think there's a chance they could trade Randle at some point. I think there's a chance he could be the odd man out. At the same time, he's been in multiple different situations throughout his career, and he's not always been a winning player, but he's always been a pretty consistent fantasy player. So where do you think Julius Randle fits in for this Knicks team to begin the year that has so much front court depth?
So he played like half the games last year, but he still played 35 minutes and averaged 24, 9, and 5. Like he was, and did it efficiently. His 3-point shooting was a little bit down. I mean, long story short, I mean, I think he can still be an effective like high 20s to low 30s minutes per game for the Knicks, especially because the Knicks don't really, I mean, they kind of have a backup center in Precious Achiuwa and Jericho Sims like as a break glass in case of emergency option. Maybe they'll play Randle some more at center. I do think guys like Josh Hart and Dante DiVincenzo and Miles McBride may take like very significant steps back in terms of minutes. Like Josh Hart saw 33 minutes a game last year. He could see 25 minutes a game this year, and that wouldn't surprise me. And same goes for DiVincenzo.
Yeah, there's almost this obligation to play Randle, and he's always been a high minute guy. The production's always there. I think they're going to need Julius Randle to buy in to what they want to do here. I mean, he's the odd man out, right? I mean, he did not go to Villanova. He went to Kentucky. He doesn't have this this Villanova connection, and obviously the Knicks found something late last season once Julius Randle was out, and you're bringing in Mikal Bridges now, who can play the 3, can play up and play the 4. To reference an iconic LeBron James tweet, Julius Randle's going to have to fit in or he's going to be out. I really think the onus will be on him to tailor his game to the rest of this team, because they almost proved last season that they don't really need Julius Randle. It's like, would you like to have him? Yes, but you don't feel like your window for contention, drops off because you lose him, especially after bringing in Bridges. So I'm very curious to see how Randle will be used early on. I think you're right. We do probably see him at center. In terms of OG Anunoby, I don't think I'm going to be drafting him very much this year. I think he still has name value, and I think that's going to push him up the board a little bit higher than he should. I just don't think there's going to be a ton of offensive production asked of OG Anunoby. Not that he's not capable of doing it, but I think he's a luxury piece ultimately for this team, and I think he's going to end up being more of a true, really high-end 3-and-D player.
I think so too. I wouldn't be surprised if he scored like 12 points per game, but the steals and blocks numbers were great. And of course he's injury prone as well. So yeah, OG Anunoby, I mean, I would draft him in maybe like the 80 to 100 range. I'm not even that confident you would get great value on that.
Yeah, you really need the defensive numbers to be there. You need the 3-point shooting to stick, which it has for the last couple of years. He's been a 38% plus 3-point shooter, over 2 made threes per game. So there's certainly value there. You'd like to see him back in the like 1.8, 1.9 steals per game range that he was with Toronto 2 seasons ago. But ultimately, I think he falls back into being a role player for the Knicks, and he's probably fine with that. There's a reason he signed on. All right, we'll go one more player for each of us, Alex. Who's next on your list?
I'm going to go with Coby White. Although you could broadly just say the Chicago Bulls, kind of like you did with the New York Knicks. Coby White, obviously, I mean, he started actually a little slow last year. People kind of forget that because his final numbers ended up so good. But complete breakout season last year. You're bringing Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic back to this roster. and preventing basically all of the young up-and-coming players on Chicago from really taking a step forward or taking on more usage. And it's not just Coby White. Like I mentioned, it's Josh Giddey could be in this conversation. If you believe in Patrick Williams, he could be in this conversation. Ayo Dosunmu to an extent. And then it is also complicated from the perspective of Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic, especially LaVine, because if he stays with Chicago, if there are no trade partners for LaVine, he is effectively the team's number one option. And he has been a very good fantasy player in the past when he's been given that kind of usage and has stayed healthy. And I don't think he's going to win a ton of extra games for you. Maybe he does. Maybe they're worried about it at least. And so I just think this entire team, like when you're drafting them, you have to be worried about how different is this going to look either in March or how, cut off at the knees is this young player I'm drafting going to be in December.
Yeah, the Bulls are in a similar, sadder situation to what we just talked about with New York. I think there's a parallel between LaVine and Randall, where it's like, all right, we saw some of these guys start to take off without you. Now you're back, and we kind of have to treat you as the number one option. We can't just marginalize you now. Like Zach LaVine is a 25 point per game player. That's just who he's been over the last 3 or 4 years when healthy. And I think the Bulls kind of have this internal obligation to him if he remains on the roster. And I don't see him being moved at this point. I think it would have happened already. Maybe there's a team that's desperate. If Zach LaVine stays healthy for the entire first half, I think he'll be a really appealing trade candidate come February. But as we know, that's basically the 2/3 mark in the season. And if you have to wait that long for Coby White to take off or Ayo Dosunmu to take off in deeper leagues, that's pretty frustrating. So I do think a lot of people might just look at what Coby White did over the second half of last season without LaVine and say, oh, this is just who he is now. I would love that to be the case. I would love Chicago to find a way to move LaVine and or Vucevic and just kind of turn this thing over to the young players. But as of right now, I think we have to operate as if that won't be the case. And this is kind of back to where we were a couple of years ago. Obviously, you're without DeMar DeRozan, so maybe that does open things up for Coby White a bit more. But you bring in Josh Giddey too, and then now that's kind of another body in that backcourt. They're also insisting that Lonzo Ball is going to play this season. I'm going to say right now, I'm not drafting Lonzo Ball. I really hope the best for Lonzo. I think this was a really fun team before he went down. I kind of love the direction that his career had been trending, but he's missed too much time. I mean, this is too serious of an injury. I would not really entertain Lonzo Ball, being a serious part of this Bulls team.
I wouldn't either. This is hard for me to say. I think I have more faith in Ben Simmons than I do in Lonzo Ball.
Oh my goodness.
If you're taking a flyer, but I would not draft Lonzo unless we're talking like the actual last pick of a 16-team league. It would not even cross my mind before then.
Okay, I'll throw out one more player, and I know he was on both of our lists, so we could go back and forth on Cam Thomas of the Brooklyn Nets. I mean, the Nets are setting us up, Alex, for an all-time bad team, good stats season, specifically for Cam Thomas, and perhaps for some other players on this roster, because as bad as the Nets are going to be, they're still going to put up their 110 points per game, whatever it's going to be. There will be fantasy stats available on this roster. I actually think Dennis Schroeder, could be a sneaky top 100 guy this year. This is now year 3 of all right, Cam Johnson, let's see it. Bojan Bogdanovic is on this roster. Obviously Nick Claxton at center, but this team I think is going to run through Cam Thomas for better or for worse.
I agree. And there are some numbers if you want to look them up. Like on RotoWire, we have the on-off court stats. If you look at last season with Bridges, Dinwiddie, and Dennis Smith off the court, per 36 minutes, Cam Thomas averaged 31 points, 3 assists, 1.4 steals, had a 35 usage rate. And this is a big sample, 253 minutes. Mm-hmm. If he scored close to 30 points per game, I won't be surprised. I think at the end of last season, he showed some more assist upside. He was becoming a better passer. Yeah, you mentioned it. They're not going to be good. They have almost no other playmakers on this roster. And I think they'll be so bad they won't need to sit him. I think he might put butts in the seats, honestly.
Maybe.
On the show, you have to worry about the field goal percentage. And teams actually focusing on him as hey, if we shut this guy off, Brooklyn's going to score 85 points. So let's just take this one guy out. It gets tough to rank him because it's his efficiency could be so bad and maybe he gets targeted and he averages only 25 points a game and it's not that efficient. On the other hand, what if it is 30 points a game?
I like him in points leagues a ton. It's not gonna. He's still got to be realistic about what the assists and the rebounds are going to look like, but he does just enough there where it's not scoring only. And the assist rate has risen a few percentage points each year in the league. He's also a very, very good free throw shooter, which I don't think we talk about much with him. And he gets there a decent amount. Like for as high scoring as he is, he's not one of these guys that chucks 10 threes a game. Like he takes a lot of twos. He tries to get to the rim. He averaged about 6 free throw attempts per 36 last season, hit him at about an 86% clip. So there is a lot to like here about Cam Thomas. And I think the field goal percentage is actually a little bit better than you think, especially if you watch Cam Thomas and you see the shot quality on a lot of these looks. I mean, just ridiculously tough looks, and he actually knocks a decent amount of them down. I think the highs are going to be very high. There's going to be a lot of nights where, we maybe make some Jordan Poole comparisons. I could see that happening, but I would also set the over under at like 2.5 50-point games for Cam Thomas and probably take the over on that number. I mean, it wouldn't shock me if he's like in the conversation for the scoring title. I really think it could be that type of season for Brooklyn where they truly don't care. Like there are no expectations, right? I mean, this is a team that's just happy to get their assets back. And they were first in line to say, look, we are throwing our hat into the Cooper Flag sweepstakes. So I don't see a ton of reason for them to pull back on Cam Thomas too much.
No, I don't think so. And it's really early right now in draft season, but his ADP on Fantrax is like 90. What can you lose drafting him there? And even on Underdog, it's in the high 60s. And I don't really think I think that's a completely fine chance to take.
All right, that'll do it for some of our rankings debates. We'll have a ton more video content coming your way over these next couple of months as we get closer and closer to opening night. We'll have video content throughout the season, of course, as well. And you can read all of our articles. There'll be a ton of those coming at RotoWire.com. If you're not a subscriber, go check it out right now, RotoWire.com/try. That'll give you a free look behind the paywall. We don't ask for a credit card. We don't ask for any of that. Just give us your email. That's that, RotoWire.com/try. By the way, if you like this video, give it a like, give a subscribe to the RotoWire NBA YouTube channel. We appreciate everybody who's already subscribed. It really means a lot, and that helps us out a ton. So go check out RotoWire.com/try, like, subscribe to RotoWire. We'll talk to you guys soon.